Mr. Speaker, I second the motion in the name of my honourable friend, Kenneth Thiong. I cannot agree more that we need both dynamic local companies and opportunities for businesses to succeed, which is why my contribution to this debate will focus on how we can wean ourselves away from a top-down, foreign investment-reliant, multinational corporation or MNC-centric economic model and instead build a bottom-up, domestic capital-led small and medium enterprise or SME focused one. I will also weave in constructive critique on the recently released Economic Strategy Review, or ESR. To start, it's useful to sketch out what our traditional growth model has been. Essentially, the strategy was to accumulate more of what economists call factors of production, to ride on increases in the labor force due to demographic change, while simultaneously building up complementary capital, both manufactured in the form of machines, factories, equipment, as well as human, through education. For the former, we marshaled foreign savings with heavy foreign direct investment from MNCs in the early years, and since the turn of the century, inward portfolio investment from global funds and family offices. We supplemented this with forced domestic saving from households in the form of CPF and from the state by maintaining large fiscal surpluses. For the latter, we cranked up educational attainment by rapidly educating our school-aged children, then starting in the 1990s by increasingly absorbing skilled workers from abroad. We coupled this build-up of factors with fundamentals. Exploiting our geographical location, we fostered an economy open to trade in goods, services, and finance. We also placed emphasis on quality institutions, an attractive, low-tax climate, respect for property rights, and rule of law, and high-functioning civil service. We fired on all these cylinders, which brought us famously from a per capita income of around $1,600 at independence, $1,600 Singapore dollars at independence to more than 121,000 today, a massive increase by any stretch of the imagination. Now, notwithstanding how we were already ahead in the 1960s, at least relative to the rest of the developing world, our growth story is undeniably impressive. Now, this model is not unique to us. It was successfully deployed by Japan in its early industrialization. And the approach, with some idiosyncratic variations, was how the other East Asian dragon economies of Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Singapore and South Korea became wealthy. And starting in the 1980s, China has adapted the self-same model. As successful as this traditional model was, it had embedded within it several pathologies. It made us obsessed, somewhat, with courting foreign capital, and fearful of right-minded pro-worker policies that would reduce our attractiveness as regional headquarters. Our educational system churned out a formidable number of excellent operators, but far fewer risk-taking entrepreneurs. And in the drive to economize on scarce land, our government's leasehold model has fostered a rent-seeking mindset in real estate, rather than treating land as just another normal input to production. Perhaps the most damning drawback is a known design flaw. In the relentless pursuit of accumulating inputs to production, we have lagged in productivity growth. Now, to be fair, this was also the case with the other dragon economies. Yet even among them, Singapore has fared the worst. Just as important, these other economies, once they entrenched their high income status, began to evolve their model toward a more internally driven, self-sustaining, productivity-led one. We have yet to do so decisively. Some may argue that we should make no excuses for growth. I believe that this is incomplete at best and misguided at worst. After all, we already know how to drive root growth. Crank up capital expenditure to the detriment of labor, income, and productivity. Indeed, this has been the consistent criticism of Singapore's growth model during its rapid growth phase from the 1960s through to the 1990s, and was arguably the impetus for the menagerie of productivity campaigns and bodies that, alas, has not overturned our nation's productivity woes. And while it's tempting for us to look at bolstering growth from tried and tested tools, such as building up yet more of our already intensive capital stock, we must resist because it is clear that disproportionately prioritizing resource allocation into hard infrastructure investment, especially in real estate, is running up against diminishing returns. So, what would such a new model look like? For starters, We must evolve away from our traditional reliance on foreign MSCs as a driver of our growth and pivot toward SMEs as our homegrown economic engine. While the ESR speaks about both, it betrays somewhat an implicit bias toward the former. We need a conscious shift from not too much fixation with tax competition, an undervalued exchange rate, and the wooing of footloose multinationals. We must instead promote bottom-up formation and growth of our indigenous companies and unleash the innovative and entrepreneurial spirit of our local workforce. This means weaning our companies off a race to the bottom focus on cost-cutting as the only means to be competitive. Revenue and wages should instead hinge on productivity gains, not a relentless search for cheaper inputs. Margins can and should be driven by elevating value add and quality. What we want is a made in Singapore to be synonymous with better, not just faster or cheaper, which is best left to economies lower down the income ladder. Now, to be clear, this is not simply an appeal for faster growth, not just for growth's sake. It is of existential importance, especially in the age of artificial intelligence. Research shows that worldwide, small firms drive disruptive innovation, and startups are the bulwark of sustainable growth through this process of creative destruction. Yet, while SMEs account for 99 out of 100 registered enterprises here and provide jobs for 7 out of 10 Singaporean workers, they currently only contribute to half of the economy's value added. If our SMEs are stifled because business or funding opportunities are crowded out by the bigger players, they will never discover our own homegrown, globally competitive unicorns. Or if they simply choose to coast along without feeling empowered to challenge large incumbent firms, we will never build a vibrant body of SMEs that form the backbone of our economy, like Germany's Mittelstand or Japan's Taiheiyo industrial belt. To enable this transformation, we need a domestic body of medium-sized enterprises capable of growing to become the next wave of national corporate champions and driving a 21st century innovation-led economy. We need Singaporeans to start Singaporean companies and for these companies to grow and succeed domestically and on the world stage. Now, Singapore is no stranger to support for SMEs. The government will undoubtedly point to a veritable grab bag of schemes, such as the Productivity Solutions Grant, Skills Future, Enterprise Credit, Enterprise Development Grant, Market Readiness Assistance, Enterprise Workforce Transformation Package. I could go on. Now, the question isn't whether these are useful. They are. The issue is whether these catalytic grants will spur SME activity sufficiently to allow them to systematically advance to the next stage of growth, or whether there are other structural impediments that inhibit them from transforming themselves from small local firms to medium-sized, globally or competitive ones. Businesses themselves report several key constraints to growth. Most notably, SMEs struggle with low levels of productivity, something that the government itself has explicitly acknowledged. Many report an inability to attract and retain the sort of talent that will allow them to elevate their efficiency and output. Now, to be fair, our SMEs have to confront business costs among the highest in the world. And to compound the challenge, SMEs must secure financing for investment, which is especially scarce once they exit the startup stage. Our SMEs must stand ready to be the source of development innovation, the D in R&D. I've shared with this House previously about how, at less than 2% of GDP, our nation's R&D remains squarely below the global average and significantly behind that of leading innovation nations. But I also explained that this was because of anemic R&D spending by the private sector, not the government. Alas, among SMEs, this is even worse. The overwhelming majority of business R&D expenditure, or BERD, is likely to be from large enterprises. The ESR talks about R&D, but it does not underscore the importance of this pivot. I note that the Prime Minister's office announced last year a $37 billion commitment to research, innovation, and enterprise funding over the next 5 years. This will bring our public expenditure to around 1%, which will be among the global leaders. But we need to accelerate private R&D, not just with more public funding, but with complementary funding from our private capital markets as well. To be fair, tax incentives for corporations to undertake R&D are already very generous, with up to 400% deduction for the first 400,000 of qualifying expenditures every assessment year, supplemented more recently by up to 100% in refundable investment credits. SMEs have been major beneficiaries, making up 85% of R&D claims. But improving productivity is not about innovation alone. Research has shown that one important impediment to improving the efficiency of smaller firms is the quality of management. There may therefore be a case to expand the scope of qualifying R&D activities for the purposes of tax deductions for this group. This is especially for activities aimed at product commercialization, enhanced internal business operation, or overseas expansion. What is also missing is a coherent innovation pathway for all SMEs, not just those oriented towards sexy, cutting-edge fields. Founders of old economy startups may not necessarily possess the technological sophistication to navigate the Go Business Directory or the awareness to seek out business advisors in Enterprise SG. They may not be able to string together the myriad packages available or even put together credible applications. What is needed is a push rather than pull strategy, where new business registrants are automatically and routinely offered information on how they can access support from the government to roll out business development innovations over the course of their initial years. Even better, startups can match with seconded experts that grow the R&D capabilities in-house, akin to A-Star's Tee-Up program. There remains additional room for the state to act as well, through its indirect influence on GLCs. Despite being half of our economy's value added, R&D spending by domestic enterprises accounts for only 1 out of every $5. Our GLCs can lead the way by dedicating more of their retained earnings toward expenditures in applied research and development, subject to a reasonable return on investment period. Over the medium run, they can look more toward elevating their spending to more closely match those of other MNCs. Finally, we can also support SME productivity indirectly by tackling our sky-high business costs. Speaking to SMEs, the subject of crushing manpower and rent inevitably emerges. Yet scaling up and relocating is not always an option, and hence we need to look for alternatives. One simple strategy is to cap the maximum quantum that rents may increase every year to the historical increase of about 3% annually. This is a limit on the rate, not the level. Market rents will still prevail in the long run. Still, doing so will give time for businesses to adjust to jumps in their fixed costs. Such restrictions have been employed by many jurisdictions worldwide, and even if we limit it to government and agency landlords, such as HDB or JTC, it will be a major step forward. It may also be time to revisit the dependency ratio ceiling, or DRC, for certain sectors, like F&B, where Singaporeans continue to shun open positions that are advertised even at attractive wages. So, at the heart of the challenge of raising up our local SMEs is the difficulty of attracting and retaining talented workers. Singaporeans often view small firm jobs as small-time, second-tier operations, compared to a more lucrative, prestigious MNC career. The ESR report, while rightly emphasizing the importance of good jobs, remains largely silent on the gap between SME and MNC positions and how they may be bridged. Bridging this gap must recognize that smaller firms often struggle to round up sufficient financing for investment compared to larger ones. Relieving internal and external access to finance for the purposes of easing cash flow that will unlock hiring is first order if we wish to improve the viability of our young, dynamic companies. There are already schemes that support small enterprise business development. For example, the Enterprise Development Grant, or EDG, is aimed at projects, and the Productivity Solutions Grant, or PSG, is aimed at IT equipment. And they ostensibly relieve financial constraints. The EDG even explicitly recognizes human capital development projects as a core capability. Now, our PSG should do the same, since productivity is boosted as much by human capital as it is by IT equipment. And while one may argue that workforce development grants do much the same thing, the WDG appears overly restrictive, reliant on an approved consultant panel, and isn't available on an ongoing basis. I believe the scope should be more flexible and allow SMEs to bolster compensation and benefits to better match starting salaries offered by the MSCs. Beyond salaries, job seekers may be attracted to work in SMEs because of the promise of greater work variety and flexibility, and greater exposure to business roles and functions. Internship and apprenticeship programs, including those from polytechnics, universities, and the graduate industry traineeship, or GRIT, should actively look to enfold SMEs into their slate of potential employers. The career conversion program should not be limited to the wholesale trade, but be expanded to encompass a wider range of SME sectors. That said, application and reporting requirements for these programs are often onerous, stretching the already thin resources of small businesses. While I accept the need for prudence in managing public funds, we should not turn SMEs into another government bureaucracy. There should be a simplified application process for grants, and reporting process requirements should focus on fraud audit rather than extensive documentation compliance. Moreover, funds are provided on a reimbursement basis at the moment. But any small business owner, especially one that is starting up, knows that one of the principal challenges that they face is sustaining cash flow. We should also reimburse any support we offer upfront and trust SME owners to deploy these grants wisely. Of course, supporting SMEs with young talent can occur even earlier upstream. SMEs in search of skilled workers often seek out interns. Unfortunately, many young would-be graduates remain unmatched to potential SME employers. And this is not for lack of trying. Most tertiary institutions already include a job exposure scheme, but take-up remains low. In 2024, ITE supplied 1,300 students, while AUs sent 800. This is despite how attachments often translate into jobs. And perhaps more important, SME participation remains low. Around 300 firms have joined such programs, which are less than 1% of registered SMEs. One factor behind the low take-up rates could be because companies that hope to partner with tertiary institutions must co-design and co-deliver bespoke curricula. This can be insurmountable for smaller companies with limited resources and understanding of how to go about doing so. It may be better to take a cue from the German approach, where more than 1 in 10 companies participate in their equivalent program by expanding the scope of potential applicants, allowing interns to be hired using Skills Future funds, and accepting simpler application criteria from SME employers. Yet even when directed toward hiring talent, there's little structure to ensure the systematic transfer of skills such that the benefits of human capital are spread across the firm. That is especially the case for foreign talent. There's room to place greater emphasis on local capability development built into schemes such as the Pioneer Certificate incentives and Development and Expansion Initiative to better embed skills transfer to Singaporean employees. Larger grants, in particular, should be paired with a clear proposal and timetable for ensuring skills transfer, including the possibility of a sunset of foreign employment passes after a designated duration, if no additional transfer is taking place. And when local employees are sent for skills upgrading, employers of micro and small enterprises can be partially reimbursed with make-up pay to cover the costs of temporary hiring or overtime, similar to make-up pay when NS men fulfill their reservist commitments. So let me close.
Professor Lim, you have a minute left.
I hear you. To be clear, what I'm calling for is not a wholesale overhaul of our GLC-heavy, MNC-led, and foreign capital-reliant model, which has, to date, served us well. Sidelining these actors would amount to killing off the golden goose, which have established themselves as cornerstones of our corporate and industrial landscape. Our GLCs have also been increasingly competitive on international shores, projecting the economic influence of Singapore Inc. worldwide. Nor am I proposing that we abandon our foreign investment and shut the door to foreign capital flows. This will hollow out our capital base. No modern economy, much less a globalized one like ours, operates without due attention to international players. But what I am calling for are policy and institutional shifts that will usher in a changed mindset for how we should view our homegrown companies in an already wealthy, advanced economy. The shift will place small, but especially medium-sized firms at the beating heart of our nation's economic model, away from the interests of large, foreign-based MNCs, of even our GLC behemoths. What we need is creative destruction. By destroying, we will create simultaneously an economy ready for the 21st century.